Welcome back to the Lit Nerd Podcast. Today we're going to take a deep dive.
Oh, a deep dive.
Into one of Emily Dickinson's most haunting poems.
Yes.
I felt a funeral in my brain.
Yeah.
Speaking of haunting.
Oh.
Have you seen that AI-generated music video that Dreamlarking made for it?
Oh, I did.
It's like anime steampunk.
It's wild, right?
Whimsicore music.
So cool.
It's quite a trip.
It's definitely a 21st century spin on a 19th century masterpiece.
Totally.
But that's what I think makes Dickinson so fascinating.
Right.
Her work is still speaking to us, like even inspiring us all these years later.
Absolutely. Okay, so for our listeners who might need like a quick refresher, who was Emily Dickinson?
Right.
Besides like a total poetry rock star, obviously.
Obviously. Well, she was famously reclusive.
Right.
Like lived a pretty isolated life in Massachusetts. And her poetry, well, it was unlike anything else at the time.
Yeah.
Unconventional punctuation,
Yes.
Those signature dashes.
All the dashes.
All the dashes. And just this deep fascination with death, isolation, like the big questions that kind of plague the human mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I felt a funeral in my brain. It really throws you right into those depths, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the title alone is enough to make you shiver a little bit.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's such a visceral image, isn't it?
Yes.
And Dickinson, she doesn't let up from there.
No.
She places us right inside the speaker's mind, right, where this funeral is taking place. We hear the mourners, the coffin being carried, the tolling bells.
It's like she's giving us a front row seat to a mental breakdown.
Right, but here's the thing. She never explicitly says it's a mental breakdown.
Right, exactly.
It could be a metaphor.
For grief.
For grief.
Yeah.
Grief or even a spiritual crisis.
Totally.
Dickinson loves leaving things open to interpretation.
It's true.
Yeah.
She really does.
And that ambiguity is part of what makes it so powerful. It forces us to confront our own anxieties about death, about losing our minds, about the unknown.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the way that she kind of builds that anxiety is just masterful.
Yeah.
Think about all the sensory details she uses. The mourners treading with those boots of lead.
With boots of the lead.
The, creeping of the coffin.
It's so heavy, oppressive.
It's heavy, it's oppressive.
Claustrophobic.
It's almost claustrophobic, yeah.
And then that repetition.
Oh, yeah.
Beating. Like a drum getting louder and faster.
Yes.
It mimics that feeling of panic, that sense of something building inside the speaker's mind that they just can't control.
They can't control. Yeah, absolutely. And just when you think it can't get any worse.
Oh, yeah.
There's that line. And then a plank and reason broke.
Oh.
Talk about a gut punch.
Oh, it's like the foundation of their reality is crumbling. The ability to think rationally, to make sense of the world.
Yes.
It's gone.
It's gone.
And that image of the plank breaking connects back to the title so perfectly. It isn't just a funeral happening on the brain.
Right.
It's a funeral of the brain, or at least like the speaker's previous way of thinking,
Totally. And then that ending, finish knowing then. It's like she cuts us off mid-thought.
Yeah.
Just leaves us hanging on the edge of a cliff.
Right.
So what do you think comes after that, then?
Well, some scholars believe it signifies death, right?
Okay.
A complete loss of consciousness.
Interesting.
Others see it as a transition to a new state of being.
Okay.
Maybe even a form of enlightenment.
Right.
But Dickinson doesn't give us any easy answers.
No.
It's that open-endedness that allows the poem to kind of haunt us long after we finished reading it.
It totally does. It definitely makes you wonder what was going on in Dickinson's own head when she wrote this.
Yeah.
We know she was a bit of an enigma, right?
Yeah, totally.
Seriously reclusive.
Yeah.
Do you think her own life experiences kind of influenced these themes of isolation and mental anguish that we see in the poem?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
The constraints placed on women right in the 19th century.
Oh, for sure.
The expectation to conform to a specific role,
Totally.
to suppress their intellectual and creative pursuits.
Yeah.
That must have taken a toll.
Oh, yeah. So the funeral could be like a metaphor for the death of the speaker's voice, their agency in a world that just seeks to silence them.
That's a really interesting interpretation.
Yeah?
Yeah, and it highlights how Dickinson's work to be read on multiple levels.
Totally.
It's a poem about a mental breakdown, yes, but it's also a poem about societal constraints, about the struggle for individual expression in a world that often tries to put us in boxes.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that struggle, that exploration of the human psyche It's not unique to Dickinson, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
We see it in literature, art,
oh, yeah.
and especially music.
Absolutely. Think about Shakespeare's Hamlet, right?
Oh, totally.
The famously grappling with grief and madness.
Totally.
Or Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway.
Right. Yeah.
Trying to maintain a facade of normalcy while battling, like, inner turmoil.
Yes.
You know? And then you have modern musicians, like Kurt Cobain, pouring his depression and angst into, you know, Nirvana's music, or Kendrick Lamar tackling themes of mental health and societal injustice in his lyrics.
Totally.
It's interesting, isn't it, how artists from different eras and disciplines have grappled with, like, similar themes, you know?
Totally.
Using their chosen medium to explore the complexities of the human mind.
The complexities of the human mind, it does show that, like, the experience of mental anguish, of feeling trapped or misunderstood, it's something that transcends time and culture.
Absolutely.
And maybe art can be a way to process those emotions, to find a sense of connection and catharsis.
I think you're really onto something there.
Okay.
And you know what? That's a conversation that we'll be diving deeper into in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
We'll be looking at specific examples of how modern music, particularly the genre known as emo, has tackled themes of mental health, often with, like, a raw honesty that's reminiscent of Dickinson's own unflinching approach.
That's a great point. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
I'm ready for part 2.
Me too. Welcome back to the Lit Nerd Podcast. Before the break, we were just discussing how Emily Dickinson's I Felt a Funeral in My Brain explores those themes of mental anguish and isolation in a way that still resonates with us today.
And we were about to jump into how modern music, especially like the emo genre,
emo,
has kind of picked up that torch, so to speak.
Right. And it's not just about shared themes either. There's, like, a rawness and vulnerability in a lot of emo music that really echoes Dickinson's own unflinching approach to, you know, exploring the darker corners of the human psyche.
Do you have, like, an example of that?
Oh, yeah. Tons. Well, let's take My Chemical Romance's Welcome to the Black Parade, for example. A song that, like Dickinson's poem, uses the metaphor of a funeral to kind of explore themes of mortality, loss, and the struggle to find meaning in a world that can feel really chaotic and overwhelming.
I could see that. Like, they both the poem and the song create this sense of being trapped in. Like a procession that you just can't escape, you know?
Totally.
In the poem, it's the funeral procession inside the speaker's mind.
Yeah.
And in the song, it's this, like, grand theatrical parade that represents the inevitability of death.
Exactly. And both Dickinson and My Chemical Romance use such vivid imagery and powerful metaphors to convey those feelings of dread and despair. Like, think about the boots of lead in the poem, that sense of heaviness and oppression. And then in the song, you have those lines like, when I was a young boy, my father took me into the city to see a marching band.
Right.
That juxtaposition of, like, youthful innocence and the grim spectacle of the parade immediately sets a dark and foreboding tone.
It does, yeah. And there's that sense of, like, a loss of control.
Oh, for sure.
Of being swept away by forces beyond your understanding.
Yes.
Absolutely. Like in the poem when that plank in reason breaks.
Oh, yeah.
And in the song when Gerard Way sings, we'll carry on with a song of pure burning hatred for the weak and the wounded.
Right. It's like both Dickinson and My Chemical Romance are tapping into this, like, primal fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
That feeling of being powerless in the face of, you know,
death or mental breakdown.
Death or mental breakdown, exactly.
Yeah. But there's also, like, a defiance in both, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Like a refusal to go down quietly.
Totally. The speaker in Dickinson's poem, even as, you know, their world is crumbling around them, they keep clinging to that sliver of awareness.
Finished knowing then.
Finished knowing then, exactly. And My Chemical Romance, throughout the song, is like rallying the listener to join their Black Parade, right?
Boy, right.
To find strength and solidarity in the face of shared pain and mortality.
It's not just about wallowing in despair, right?
No.
There's, like, a sense of agency.
Yeah.
Finding meaning and connection, even in the darkest of places.
Exactly. And, that's one of the things that makes both I Felt a Funeral in My Brain and Welcome to the Black Parade so appealing to listeners who are struggling with their own mental health.
Oh, yeah.
It's that acknowledgement
that
you're not alone, that there's beauty and strength to be found.
Totally.
Even in the midst of suffering.
It's like art can be a lifeline, like a way to process those difficult emotions and, like, find a sense of community.
Absolutely, and that brings us back to Dickinson's legacy. Even though she was writing in a time when mental health was rarely discussed openly,
Right.
her willingness to delve into those dark and uncomfortable places kind of paved the way for artists like My Chemical Romance and countless others.
Oh, for sure.
To explore similar themes in their work.
It's amazing how a poem written over 150 years ago can
still
feel so raw and relevant today.
I know. It really is. It's a testament to Dickinson's genius, I think, and her ability to tap into, like, universal human experiences that transcend time and culture.
But it's also like a reminder that we still have such a long way to go in terms of destigmatizing mental health.
You're absolutely right. And that's where I think, like, the power of art comes in. By giving voice to these experiences, by creating spaces for, like, open and honest dialogue, we can really chip away at that stigma and help people feel less alone.
I totally agree. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Dickinson's, like, unconventional use of language and structure, those dashes, the irregular rhythms, the jarring imagery, it all, like, contributes to the poem's unsettling effect.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating?
What?
Is that some scholars actually believe that those stylistic choices were actually a reflection of Dickinson's own neurodiversity.
Okay.
Some have even suggested that she may have had conditions like epilepsy or bipolar disorder.
Interesting.
Which could explain, like, the fragmented and often chaotic nature of her writing.
That's so interesting. It really makes you wonder how much of her own personal experience is woven into the fabric of her poetry.
Right. And it challenges us to think about, like, how we interpret and analyze literature, Do we need to know everything about an author's life to appreciate their work?
Yeah.
Or is there value in simply engaging with the text on its own terms?
That's a question with no easy answers.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. But I think it's important to, like, at least be aware of the potential influence of, like, an author's background and experiences without, like, letting it overshadow the power and beauty of their art.
I agree. And ultimately, it's up to each reader to bring your own experiences and interpretations to the text.
Welcome back to the Lit Nerd Podcast. We've been, deep diving into Emily Dickinson's I Felt a Funeral in My Brain.
It's a wild ride.
Exploring its themes and its connection to music.
Yeah.
And even speculating a little bit about how her life might have influenced her writing, right?
Right.
But now let's maybe shift our focus a little bit to the poem's legacy.
Yeah, good idea.
And its lasting impact on,
on literature.
Literature and culture in general.
Yeah.
Because a poem written in the 1860s shouldn't still be hitting us this hard.
It's true.
But it does.
But it does. And I think, one of the reasons I Felt a Funeral in My Brain continues to resonate with readers is its exploration of that universal human experience of confronting mortality.
Yeah, that fear of the unknown, the sense of our own minds betraying us, is something we all kind of grapple with at some point, right?
Absolutely. And Dickinson captures that existential dread, like with such raw honesty and precision. The imagery that she uses, the way she describes the gradual breakdown of reason, it's both terrifying and strangely compelling.
Like she's giving us a glimpse into the abyss.
Yeah.
But in a way that's, like, both poetic and profound.
Exact. What's interesting to me?
What's that?
Is that even though Dickinson was writing in a very different time, right?
Right.
Her exploration of these mental states feels incredibly modern.
It's almost as if she, like, anticipated the anxieties of the 21st century.
Totally.
Yeah. Like our obsession with technology, the constant barrage of information.
Right.
The feeling of being, like, overwhelmed and disconnected.
I think you're right. I think the poem's themes of isolation and mental breakdown resonate particularly strongly in our modern world.
Really?
Where, like, so many people struggle with,
with anxiety.
Anxiety, depression, feelings of disconnection.
Yeah. And that's why I Felt a Funeral in My Brain continues to be studied, analyzed, and reinterpreted by scholars, artists, readers, everyone.
It's true. It's a poem that just offers, like, endless possibilities for exploration and meaning-making.
Speaking of reinterpretations, we talked about Dreamlarking's music video earlier.
Right.
What other modern works have been inspired by Dickinson's poem?
Well, there's a whole subgenre of like poetry and fiction that's been influenced by Dickinson's exploration of, interiority and psychological states. Authors like Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, Adrienne Rich, they all owe a debt to Dickinson's willingness to like delve into the darker corners of the human psyche.
And don't forget about like all the countless visual artists and musicians and filmmakers who have drawn inspiration from Dickinson's work as well.
Absolutely. There was even like a dance piece inspired by I Felt a Funeral in My Brain a few years back.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
It just goes to show you how powerful and adaptable Dickinson's poetry is. It can be interpreted and reinterpreted in so many different ways.
Totally.
Across different mediums and across time.
I think that's ultimately what makes I Felt a Funeral in My Brain such an enduring work of art.
Absolutely. It's a poem that speaks to something fundamental about the human experience. It's something that transcends time and culture.
It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we're not alone. That there's beauty and meaning to be found even in the midst of suffering.
Totally.
And that the power of language can help us make sense of the world even when it feels like it's falling apart.
I love that. So well said.
Well, Lit Nerds, as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to, revisit I Felt a Funeral in My Brain with fresh ears.
It's worth it.
Let Dickinson's words kind of wash over you, challenge you, haunt you.
Yeah.
And most importantly, let them remind you that you're not alone in this journey.
We're all in this together.
Called life.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening.